I had been a fan of your channel for about a year, and for months, I've been wanting to share my story, but it took me a while to finally sit down and write it out. I used to run a YouTube channel myself and had quite a large following, which is why I think you'll relate to some of the darker sides of being a YouTuber. It all started one rainy summer evening in 2012. I was aimlessly scrolling through YouTube, trying to fight off boredom, when I stumbled across a video called something like Hellboy comic book page turning. The creator's name was Ephemeral Rift, and I remember thinking the video would be dull. He simply flipped through a hardcover collection of Hellboy comics, page by page, without uttering a single word. At first, it seemed uneventful. The pages turned slowly, but not slowly enough for me to actually read the content. Normally, I would have wondered why anyone would upload something like this, but there was something about the deliberate, quiet motions and the soft sound of the pages turning that I found oddly soothing. I sat there, headphones on, completely absorbed for the entire 15 minutes of the video. And when it ended, I wanted more. That's when I first discovered ASMR, Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response, a strange, almost tingling feeling triggered by certain sounds or interactions, one that left me hooked from that moment on. Soon, I found myself immersed in other ASMR creators, starting with Gentle Whispering ASMR, or Maria, as she's known to her countless fans, and then moving on to ASM Requests and Heather Feather. Yet, Ephemeral Rift remained my favorite. Even now, more than a decade later, I still find comfort in his videos. His content was so captivating that it inspired me to create my own ASMR channel. But as anyone who ventures into that world can tell you, starting a serious ASMR channel isn't easy, and it definitely isn't cheap. The most critical piece of equipment for any ASMR artist is a top-notch microphone, but I had to wait until my 18th birthday to finally get one. My mom thought it was a peculiar gift request, but she generously fulfilled my wish, and from there, I was off. I posted my first video in January of 2013, a simple poetry reading in a soft, spoken tone. By the end of that first week, I had a modest but encouraging handful of subscribers, thanks in part to my ASMR Twitter connections. As I gained confidence, my videos became more elaborate. One, in particular, seemed to stand out from the rest. It was called something like Sleep Fairy Conjures Pleasant Dreams, and it featured me suggesting calming, pleasant things for viewers to dream about. I put a lot of effort into the script and even the costume, so I was ecstatic when I saw the view count climb to around 2,000. But by the next morning, that number had exploded to over 15,000. And with that jump came a flood of new subscribers and countless comments praising my work. But then came the darker side of being a creator. Nestled among the supportive messages were a few comments that were nothing short of cruel. How am I supposed to relax when someone so ugly is talking? Read one. You're annoying. Delete your account and apologize for thinking anyone wants to look at you, said another. Although I was taken aback, I wasn't completely surprised. I had heard about internet trolls before, those who post offensive or provocative messages with the sole intention of eliciting an emotional reaction. What I didn't realize at the time was that trolls were only the beginning. As a female creator who chose to show her face, I was bound to attract more than just mean comments. And while the negative remarks became easier to brush off over time, I wasn't prepared for what would come next, the fans. Not the trolls hiding behind the anonymity of a screen, but the ones who start off supportive, only to slowly reveal a more obsessive and unsettling side. After about a year of growing my channel, I had amassed 250,000 subscribers and was regularly posting videos once a week. One day, I received a handwritten letter in my P.O. box from a man named Will, who said he was 37 and from the UK. He gushed about how much my videos had helped him manage his anxiety and finally get a good night's sleep. It was a beautiful, heartfelt letter, and, as I always tried to do with dedicated fans, I wrote him a brief note of thanks. I appreciated his kind words, but I didn't want to encourage too much back and forth. I had grown cautious of forming personal connections with fans, knowing the risks that came with crossing those boundaries. But Will didn't seem to understand that. He sent another letter shortly after, this time thanking me profusely for replying and telling me how rare it was for creators to connect with their audience the way I did. He even included a sketch he had drawn of me. It was a flattering picture, admittedly well done, and he mentioned that he was taking an art course. Despite the unease I had initially felt from his letters, I was touched by the effort he put into the drawing and decided to send him another short reply, thanking him for the artwork. I should have known better. Will's next letter was longer, and this time, the tone shifted. He confessed that his feelings for me had grown into something more than just admiration. He said he was in love with me. The more I read, the more unsettled I became. At the end of the letter, he included another drawing. This time, it was of me, but I was pregnant, and standing behind me was a figure that he claimed was himself, his hand resting on my belly. The title of the drawing? Our Future. I felt sick. I threw the letter and the drawing in the trash and broke down in tears. My mom tried to reassure me, reminding me that being a public figure attracts all kinds of people, including those who cross boundaries. But this felt different, dangerous. I stopped responding to Will's letters, hoping he would eventually lose interest and move on. But he didn't. Instead, he grew more persistent, posting comments on my videos, demanding to know why I hadn't replied to his latest letter. At first, I thought Will had finally moved on. Weeks passed without any sign of him. No comments, no letters, no emails. I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I was free from his unsettling presence. I had bigger things to focus on anyway. My channel was growing, and I was planning collaborations with other ASMR creators to help boost my following. One of my subscribers, the same sweet person who had knitted me that adorable purple octopus, sent me another gift, a companion to the first one, this time an orange octopus. She let me know when it was shipped, and I received a text alert when the package arrived. I was excited to pick it up, feeling happy that my viewers cared enough to send me such thoughtful gifts. It was a busy day, and I had errands to run, but I made sure to stop by the post office to grab the package. When I approached the counter and handed over my ID, the woman behind the counter, who was usually friendly, suddenly seemed tense. She asked me to confirm my P.O. box number, something she'd never done before. Her demeanor had shifted from cheerful to serious in the span of seconds. She then asked if we could speak privately. My stomach dropped. I just knew, this had something to do with Will. My mind raced, imagining the worst. Maybe he'd sent something vile, something they had to destroy due to safety concerns. But no, that wasn't it. The postmistress told me that earlier that day, a man had come and asking about my P.O. box. He'd handed her a letter and started asking a barrage of questions about me. He wanted to know my name, how often I collected my mail, and even which days I usually visited. When she refused to give him any information, explaining it was against policy, he became angry. He insisted that we were close friends and needed to find me. When she pointed out that, if we were so close, he should already know my name, his behavior grew more aggressive. It wasn't until she threatened to call the police that he finally left. The letter he handed her, she hadn't put in my box. She kept it, intending to hand it over to the authorities because it likely had his fingerprints on it. I felt nauseous. Of course, it was Will. He had tracked me down, come face to face with the postmistress, trying to get to me. I hadn't even considered that my P.O. box wasn't as anonymous as I'd hoped. It wasn't like the high security ones that private companies offer. In that moment, I felt utterly defeated. I realized I wasn't cut out for this. I wasn't prepared to deal with someone like him, with the relentless obsession that creeps into your life like a shadow you can't shake. It was too much. So I made the decision, I deleted my channel. Every video, every trace of it. I just couldn't handle the constant anxiety, the feeling of being hunted by this stranger who refused to let me go. And though, at the time, it felt like a massive weight had been lifted from my shoulders, I've never fully shaken the regret. There's a part of me that feels like I gave up, that I let him win. Every now and then, I think about starting over, creating a new channel, being more cautious, keeping my face and location off camera. But each time, I remember that drawing, the one we made, and the fear comes flooding back. That one image is enough to extinguish any flicker of desire to return. And so, I let it all go. It was the cold winter of 2015, and I was living in Brighton, a lively coastal city in southern England. Originally from New York City, I had spent the last decade split between the US and the UK, a balance that allowed me to follow my passion for hairstyling. My career had brought me great success, with clients like Hailey Baldwin and Sigourney Weaver, making it easy to find work on both sides of the Atlantic. But that winter, my life took a dark turn. The end of my 12-year relationship was the trigger for what would become a series of horrifying events. The breakup plunged me into a deep depression, not unfamiliar territory for me. I had suffered tragedy before. My parents both passed away when I was young after contracting HIV, which led to AIDS. My father had been a heroin addict, and unknowingly, he passed the virus on to my mother. Watching them fade away had scarred me deeply, and losing my partner revived that long-buried grief. Desperate to escape my despair, I turned to a dating app, hoping for a quick rebound to lift my spirits. That's when I met Daryl Rowe, a 24-year-old from Edinburgh. Like me, Daryl had faced his share of hardships. He'd been adopted by a loving couple, Jackie and Harry, but arrived at their home covered in scars and with a strange attachment to over 100 Barbie dolls. Despite his troubled past, he seemed eager to build a new life in Brighton, a place known for its acceptance and freedom. We connected quickly through messages on the app, and though Daryl was younger, his attention gave me a sense of validation after my breakup. He was charming, full of compliments, and made me feel attractive again. However, early in our conversations, a red flag appeared. When the topic of intimacy came up, Daryl casually dismissed the idea of using protection. That was a hard line for me. I started to pull back, blocking him on social media and planning to cut off contact entirely. But Daryl managed to convince me otherwise, promising to respect my boundaries. Eventually, I let my guard down, even giving him my address after days of exchanging selfies and seemingly innocent texts. One evening, he showed up unannounced at my door. Caught off guard, I was hesitant, but Daryl's charm and persistence won me over, and I let him in. That night, we drank, flirted, and ended up in bed. I made it clear that protection was non-negotiable, and Daryl assured me he would comply. The next morning, things took a strange turn. Daryl, seemingly normal the night before, began talking about the benefits of veganism and, disturbingly, drinking his own urine. I knew then that it was time for him to leave, and I politely asked him to go, explaining I had plans for the evening. Though he left without protest, the following days revealed a much darker side of him. Daryl became erratic, sending messages and making calls, accusing me of disrespecting him. His behavior grew more alarming by the day. Eventually, I blocked him again, hoping to move on, but a week later, he called from an unknown number. His voice was full of anger and threats. "You'll never get rid of me," he said. "You're going to burn." I hung up, thinking it was just the rage of a rejected lover. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I woke up feeling unwell. At first, I thought it was just a cold, but when the symptoms persisted, I saw a doctor. The tests came back with life-altering news. I had contracted HIV. My world crumbled. It was as if my worst nightmare, the one I had lived through as a child, had returned to haunt me. I began treatment immediately and confided in a nurse during one of my clinic visits. To my shock, she told me that I wasn't the first to report this. 3 other men had recently come forward, all with eerily similar stories. Each had been infected with HIV after meeting Daryl. He had even taunted them afterward, just as he had done with me. One of the men, Stuart, had also met Daryl through the same dating app. Daryl had invited him to his apartment, where they became intimate. Afterward, Stuart grew suspicious that Daryl hadn't used protection despite his assurances. His fears were confirmed when Daryl later messaged him, mocking him for not realizing the truth sooner. Another victim, Peter, had met Daryl at the gym. Daryl had promised that their encounter would be safe, but afterward, he sent Peter a chilling message: "I lied. I'm HIV positive." Daryl had preyed on all of us, using charm and deception to inflict pain. Each of us had been manipulated, and in the aftermath, we were left to pick up the pieces of our shattered lives. When it became clear that Daryl was truly enraged, and his possessiveness wasn't some twisted joke, Andrew blocked him on all platforms, determined to move on. However, just over a month later, Andrew was out for drinks with a coworker when a series of messages lit up his phone. The first one read, "Hope you enjoyed yourself." The second came with a chilling smiley emoji, followed by, "I have HIV, and now you do too." The timing of Daryl's message was no coincidence. If someone is exposed to HIV, they can obtain a drug called post-exposure prophylaxis, which can prevent the infection if taken within 72 hours. Daryl could have easily told his partners about his condition, but instead, he waited for weeks to drop the horrifying news, ensuring his victims wouldn't have the chance to protect themselves from one of the deadliest diseases of our time. When Daryl's 4 victims realized his claims were likely true, their disbelief quickly turned to fear. Panic-stricken, they rushed to get tested, but the wait, even if just 24 hours, was a torturous eternity. Andrew, drinking alone, clutched a bottle of wine, praying that his results would be negative. The next day, when the call from the doctor came, he could barely hold the phone, trembling as he confirmed his identity. He had braced himself for the worst, imagining a future shadowed by HIV. But after the formalities, the doctor informed him that his results were negative. He nearly collapsed in relief, as did Peter, who also received the all-clear. Unfortunately, Stuart Roger wasn't as lucky. When his doctor confirmed he had contracted HIV, Stuart was devastated, but he wasted no time in reporting Daryl's actions to the authorities. He provided them with everything they needed: Daryl's description, his phone number, home address, and the incriminating messages. "From the moment I got my diagnosis, I knew I had to report him," Stuart later revealed. Daryl, he explained, was a dangerous individual who needed to be stopped. Using Stuart's information, the police tracked Daryl to a nearby town and executed a dawn raid to prevent any chance of escape. They found Daryl in bed with yet another man, his 8th known victim. After seizing Daryl's phone, the police discovered the horrifying extent of his crimes. Hundreds of potential victims were scattered across his social media accounts, many of which were created using false identities. Each of these men had to be contacted, informed of the chilling possibility that their lives had been put in jeopardy. During his police interview, Daryl claimed ignorance about his status, a lie that quickly unraveled. He had been aware of his diagnosis for almost a year. The charges against him quickly escalated from 1 to 4 to 7, as more evidence emerged. Although he could have been held and tried in England, most of his crimes had taken place in Scotland. As a result, he was handed over to the Scottish police and transferred to Edinburgh. Shockingly, the Scottish police released him on bail into the care of his foster parents. But almost immediately after the emotional reunion, Daryl fled, hiding in the Pentland Hills near Edinburgh. Furious upon hearing of Daryl's escape, Lenny couldn't comprehend how someone so dangerous had been let go. "He kept saying he would do it again," Lenny said. "It's terrifying to think how many more victims there could be." The search for Daryl dragged on for months, with the police combing through the Edinburgh countryside. They eventually found an abandoned tent, along with a carton of antiviral medication prescribed to Daryl. Disturbingly, the medication had never been touched. It was meant to make him less contagious, but Daryl's refusal to take it showed he had no intention of stopping his SIT campaign. By November 2016, Daryl had been on the run for nearly a year. 25 more victims had come forward, prompting the police to intensify their efforts. They focused on Brighton and Edinburgh but had no idea Daryl had fled to Newcastle under the alias Gary Cole. There, he continued to use dating apps to lure new victims. One of them was Tom, who later admitted, "I've always found it hard to approach men, which made me an easy target." Daryl had sweet-talked his way into Tom's life, living rent-free for 3 months. "He said I had nice eyes," Tom said. "I was flattered. I could have fallen for him." But soon, Daryl's charm gave way to cruelty. "He controlled me in ways I never thought possible," Tom confessed. Meanwhile, police continued their search and eventually linked Daryl to an escort website. A detective noticed striking similarities between one of the profiles and Daryl. The number listed on the account led them to Tom's home. As soon as the police arrived, Daryl tried to flee. He leapt from a third-story window, only to land hard, breaking several vertebrae. He was found in excruciating pain, unable to move. Tom, unaware of Daryl's true identity, was taken into custody for questioning but was released once the police realized the extent of Daryl's deception. Relieved, Tom tested negative for HIV, but the emotional scars remained. "I felt used," he admitted. Daryl's trial marked a historic moment in British law, the first time someone had been tried for deliberately spreading a deadly pathogen. The evidence was overwhelming, and Daryl was found guilty of 5 counts of causing grievous bodily harm and 5 counts of attempted grievous bodily harm. Sentenced to 5 years in prison, the judge made it clear, this is not about stigmatizing anyone living with HIV. It is about justice. You waged a campaign of violence, knowing exactly what you were doing. For his victims, the relief was bittersweet. "HIV isn't a death sentence anymore," Lenny said, "but it's still a cruel thing to inflict on someone. And that's what I can't get over, someone made that choice for me."